This day is given to us beyond anything we could create or earn. Regardless whether deserved or undeserved, we receive this day and this year as a gift from the universe, a gift from God, a gift from life itself. So come and let us worship with gratitude for this and so many gifts, with humility for our shortcomings, resilience to face the challenges ahead, and let us worship with hope that we will continue to transform our lives and to transform our world. Virtual worship, the first one for the year 2022. We're glad that you have joined us from wherever you may be located right now. I'm Reverend Aricosa, our interim minister. I serve alongside our senior minister, Reverend Nathan Ryan, that you'll hear from in just a minute. Pleased to be joined here in the sanctuary by Lee Hartman, our music director, Robin Mulder, running tech, and also in the building today, our Director of Family Ministries, Kathy Smith, who's running the online chat for this morning's worship service. There is, in this new year, much that is happening in the church, even though some things are changing as our COVID numbers are higher. And nonetheless, we will be continuing to hold worship virtually at 9 a.m. and in person outside at 11:30. We'll also continue to have the middle hour activities outside starting at 10:15 a.m., including today. So you are welcome to come join us for that if you're in the area. As soon as the service is over, come on up. There are some other things to share as well, and we have them framed as a lesson for you to be shared now by our senior minister, Reverend Nathan Ryan.
Hey everyone, sorry to not be in worship with you, but I'll be there next week. I'm preaching. It's gonna be a good service. Not as good as this one, but it'll be good. Anyway, I just wanted to let you know some of the changes that we're gonna do with the staff and to make this more sustainable work. So real quickly, that mic wasn't getting out. I've got it.
You got it on now?
That mic, no, this one wasn't working. That right there wasn't working. So I wanted to tell you some of the changes we're going to try out. I don't have enough working right now to prep for services. So because what happens is I have meetings sort of clustered on every single day. So I'm going to try and stick all the meetings on Tuesday day and Thursday day, and reserve Monday and Wednesday really more for writing, reflection, reading kind of days. Also, I found, especially as the church is firing back up and doing all sorts of cool stuff, that I was in meetings almost every night a week, and I just not get to see my family. So I am committing to do one evening of meetings a week, and the rest of the evenings will be with my family. So it's one evening a week. And so I also decided to ask the staff to start making some commitments to set good boundaries around their time. You should know your staff has worked harder than I've ever seen any staff work before the pandemic, but especially during the pandemic. And so one of the first things that I did when I was senior is I asked the staff, so you're supposed to get like Saturday and Sunday off. Well, most of us work on Sunday, and if we took Friday, Saturday off, sometimes there's a wedding or there's a conference or there's a thing, and Friday or Saturday goes away. So I asked the staff every month, we actually have a whole calendar for this, where we put in 2 days off on average per week. And we hold each other accountable to it. The problem is it's a little too cumbersome to communicate to you when all of the off days are. So what I'm going to ask for you to do is to get in the habit of thinking of Monday and Fridays as the off days for staff, and know that that's not always accurate, but it's a good rule of thumb. There you are. Those are the things we're going to, those are the things we're going to try in the new year. I would encourage you to think of church this way. Instead of thinking about, well, here's the treatment I get in my workplace, I demand my church also be treated that way. I'd encourage you to think of your church as a laboratory for the world as it should be. So I want you to go to your employer and say, in my church, our staff are not being asked to overwork, and it's one of our religious values that everyone gets to spend time with their family and have a healthy work-life balance, for example. We want the church to be the place that models how the world could be. So I hope you'll engage with these changes in that mindset.
With apologies for some recent audio trouble, which we think and hope we have resolved now, we do share with one another in so many ways as we worship together. Let's make now a symbolic expression of that sharing as we participate virtually in the ritual of sharing stones. If you have something on your heart, something that is deeply important or meaningful for you in this time, our tradition is to place a stone in the basin of our chalice. Since we cannot physically be together, I will place them in your physical absence, but invite you to participate virtually in our chat. Type an asterisk for your stone. We don't have time for as many details, but some choose, if you have a specific person that your stone is for, to type their name. So please type in now as I share some stones. And we light the flame in our chalice, symbol of our freely covenanted Unitarian Universalist faith, saying together the words, saying together, with hope to make this a better world, we light this flame. Its light is a symbol of the power of love.
From all that will belong.
Did you hear that NASA hired 24 theologians? I know this sounds like the setup for a joke. It's not, I assure you. And though it's not actually accurate, something pretty close to it did indeed happen. And it's made virtual news these last few days, even though it actually happened a few years ago. What specifically did happen was that NASA helped fund a project that was being run at Princeton University by a center there, the Center for Theological Inquiry. This was 4 to 6 years ago, and it just made news now because one of the people who participated in the project, theologian and priest in the Church of England, is publishing a book on the subject this coming year that's just been announced. The title of the book is Astrobiology and Christian Doctrine. And the reason NASA had an interest in this project is because it was to invoke input from thought leaders in many religious traditions about how people in the various traditions might respond out of their faith and out of their beliefs to news that life had been discovered on other planets, be it intelligent life or otherwise. And it's a subject that NASA had some public relations interest in, at least. And though there's a lot more that could be said about it, I think one of the fascinating upshots is that though there's a belief among some in more secular circles that the discovery of intelligent life in other places particularly could be detrimental to catastrophic for some faith traditions, most of the people who participated in this project, and from their perspective, most people of faith that they know of, are not going to have their beliefs or perspectives phased all that much by such a discovery. Nonetheless, the news has gone viral, and it's led to a number of responses. I know of more than one of my own colleagues who's made comments to the fact that they were disappointed that they themselves were not participated to be among the 24 theologians who participated. The one that's probably gotten the most traction, though, is a tweet that was made a week ago today and has gone viral, which says, NASA just hired 24 theologians to assess how the world would react if we discovered alien life. And I have a feeling this subplot in the season finale of 2021 is planting the seeds for the main storyline of 2022. Well, humor aside, the fact that there is some anxiety and almost expectation of dramatic happenings coming into this new year, maybe it's not that surprising. We have certainly been through quite a tumultuous few recent years, and they have seemed in so many ways to build upon one another. To quote from one other meme that I saw recently, never have so many expected so little from a new year. Basically, if an asteroid doesn't hit Earth, we're good. It's an exaggeration, sure. And it speaks to how we are becoming accustomed, if certainly weary, of big changes. And I find myself thinking of a line used frequently in a television show from some years ago. The TV show was The West Wing, which was centered around the senior staff at the White House. And the president, who is portrayed in the series by the actor Martin Sheen, President Bartlett was his name, was known for frequently saying, especially in the Oval Office, "What's next?" indicating that he was ready to move on to the next subject, even though the subject that they'd been dealing with might not yet have been finalized. We have so many ways of thinking about this year to come. And it is natural for us to ask, what's next for us? What's next for us as people in our personal lives, in the world around us, in the church? And for this first sermon of the new year, that's one of the things we'll talk about. And I'll say more in a couple of minutes, starting with some talk about what it means to be through times of transition in general.
A few years ago, when we'd been married only a short time, my husband asked me what I wanted to do on our trip to Sedona, Arizona. I thought for a minute and then asked, could we go on a hot air balloon ride? He made the arrangements. Once in Sedona, we got up at 5 a.m., saw a beautiful sunrise, and watched them ignite the inside of the balloon. We climbed in the basket with a whole bunch of strangers. That was when I told my husband I was afraid of heights. It was an amazing ride. We saw the red hills up close enough to land. We floated past tall trees and watched the sun continue on its journey. I held the basket tightly almost the entire time. The rest of the time, I held on to him. The horizon seemed to never end. Yesterday, I told our 3-year-old son about the ride. I promised him that he could go too, once he's old enough and tall enough to be in the basket. I realized that it would also be terrifying to take him because I'd be worried about his safety. At the same time, I would love to watch his face, to experience his wonder as his parent. Life is full of seesaws. It offers us moments of extreme wonder and moments of fear. There's a choice to be made sometimes between the two. Sometimes you have to live through the fear for the wonder to arrive, and other times they arrive separately. You have to hold on to the basket, and sometimes your loved ones during the ride. But man, is the scenery worth every moment.
I'll be just a bit more cautious going forward and leave the mask on. And also say a couple of things. One is to note that the reading we just heard, originally written by my colleague and friend, Reverend Elizabeth Harding, talks in a way that I found very helpful about how when we face new circumstances, there is a degree of wonder and also a degree of fear that we often face, and that holding them both together, even though we have to do so in different ways in varying circumstances, holding them together, honoring and acknowledging the fear and the wonder both, is so vitally important for us remembering how we can be present and be engaged with what's happening around us. And if we ignore or deny one or the other, then we're doing ourselves and often those around us a disservice. That is so especially true in times of change, in times of transition. And I want to reiterate something I believe I've shared before, but it's a perspective I've found incredibly helpful in these times of transition, which, and forgive me as I grab something, this walking stick, symbolic of this time of transition and transitional ministry we've been walking through, has for me for years been an important symbol of what it is to pass through such times, and a symbol that I've often used in interim ministries, which
we have on one level completed but are still in a new phase now. And I'll say more about that in a few moments in the next section of the sermon. But I'll note that there's a perspective on transitions that has been influential by the writer William Bridges. William Bridges is his name. And he talks about the difference between change, transition, and transformation. Now, they tend to go together, but they refer to different aspects. These are in his words. Change and transition are not the same. Change is the external event or situation that takes place. Transition is the inner psychological process that people go through to adapt to a change. And I'll add that transformation, which he speaks about in other parts of his writings, is the result of that process of transition. It's the outcome of having adapted, of having engaged in a new way, the circumstances that have changed around us. And Bridges also talks about the fact that in most any change, we can identify a flow from a couple of different steps, one to the other. And the first step, perhaps counterintuitively, is that something ends. Something comes to an end. And after that ends, there's this period in between that ending and the whatever new is beginning. There's what he sometimes calls the neutral zone in between the two. It's a liminal time. It's a time of uncertainty and often a time of anxiety. As Bridges writes, people go through an in-between time when the old is gone, but the new is not fully operational. It's when the critical psychological realignments and repatternings take place. It is the very core of the transition process. This is the time between the old reality and sense of identity and the new one. People are creating new processes and learning what new roles will be, but it's in flux. It is in flux, and it doesn't feel comfortable yet. It is the seedbed of the new beginnings that are sought. Well, there have been, of course, extended changes in the church, not only with the extended period of transition from the ending of your previous senior minister to calling your associate former as your senior now, and continuing in a new phase as we're in search for the new minister of congregational life, your new second minister. But there's also extensive changes happening in our nation and our world. We have this pandemic that we are now entering the third year of. We have a dramatically changed political climate, including living in the aftermath of an insurrection that occurred a year ago this coming week. I could say much about that, but I believe my colleague, Reverend Nathan Ryan, will be speaking to that and reflecting on that to some extent next Sunday. And there are so much about the times that are changing as we are engaging with racial injustices and systematic racism in new ways and ever increasing ways, with homophobia and transphobia, with so many kinds of oppressions and injustices that are being faced ever still and anew. The question comes up, how do we adapt to, how do we transition through all of this change? Well, one thing that's important to recognize, as William Bridges quotes, empathetic leaders recognize that change puts people in crisis. We know that that's true for so many of you. Those of us on staff know that it's true for some of us as well. You heard Reverend Nathan speak to that in the lesson earlier, and many of you received an email yesterday with a video reflection on that topic also. There is so much change to adapt to. So in a few minutes, I'm going to speak to what it is about these times that here at the church specifically that is changing, and we'll be engaged in reflecting on that. I invite us into a time of deeper sharing, a time of prayer. And here at the beginning of a new year, I offer, as we reach deep within ourselves, reach far beyond ourselves to connect with what we know to be sacred, I offer these prayerful words, a prayer for the new year, originally written by Howard Thurman. Spirit of life and love, God known by so many names, mystery beyond all of our naming. As Dr. Thurman prayed, grant that I may pass through the coming year with a faithful heart. There will be much to test me and make weak my strength before the year ends. In my confusion, I shall often say the word that is not true and do the thing of which I am ashamed. There will be errors in the mind and great inaccuracies of judgment. In seeking the light, I shall again and again find myself walking in darkness. I shall mistake my light for greater light, and I shall drink from the responsibility of the choice I make. Though my days be marked with failures, stumblings, fallings, let my spirit be free, so that you may take it and redeem my moments in all the ways my needs reveal. Grant me the quiet assurance of love and presence. Grant that I may pass through the coming year with a faithful heart. Amen.
All summer, workers have been building a brick wall along a road by my neighborhood. Against the brutal heat, they take their bricks in their hands, one by one, butter them thickly with mortar, line them up, and tap them down, row by row. One man who looks to be in his 70s is the leader, slender and tall. He moves from one group of bricklayers to the next, I see him teach the others how to work. He stoops over to look at a line of bricks, inspecting the work. He looks like he loves what he's doing. I wonder how he can love building walls day after day. Is it the teaching he loves? Does he love the wall itself? Or does he love the process, the geometry of it? I think from the look on his face that he loves the process. I think he will go on to the next wall, then the next one, and the next, and never be bored. I want to be like that. As a minister, the bricks are stories. I hear stories of family and work, stories of loss and reconciliation. I tell stories every Sunday, inviting people to learn and laugh and think. Brick by brick, story by story, we build a church, seeing the patterns, the symmetry, the plain joy of setting one story on another. We will never be finished. It's okay.
Well, as I said a moment ago, there are a lot of changes that are happening here in response to particularly this growing pandemic, but also other aspects of transition as well. We heard Reverend Nathan Ryan speak a little earlier in this service about some changes around staffing and staff workload. And I'll just say from my own personal perspective, my own tendencies not to watch the clock as closely as I could are going to be tested in that time as well. And it's an important test for me to engage. Also, there are, of course, the changes that have happened in worship in the last couple of weeks. And we all hate that the timing was such that it had to start with the Christmas Eve services. But it was good to be together even outside. And it was good to find a new way of doing things, which we're still growing into. And I look forward to exploring how our outdoor worship services at 11:15, as well as our, once again, virtual-only services here at 9 o'clock, will evolve over the next few weeks, though, of course, we all hope it will only be a few weeks. But it's not just those sets of changes either. I spoke about this other phase of the transition we're in. And I said it's an extended transition, and that's sort of true and sort of not. It felt extended for many people, but as I've reminded a few, the traditional time frame between the ending of one minister's tenure and the beginning of the next called minister's tenure tends to be about 2 years. In a Unitarian Universalist church, that's become a pretty standard time frame. Not all the time, but a number of times. And that's actually exactly what it was here. Your senior minister, his last day serving this church was Epiphany 2019, January 6th. Your new senior minister, Reverend Nathan Ryan, his first day of serving in that role was Epiphany 2021, exactly 2 years later. But you did have more than one interim minister, transitional minister, during that time frame, which helped to make it feel longer. And oh yeah, there was something about a global pandemic that started halfway through the time, which has made all sense of time meaningless for so many of us. But also the fact that there's now another search. And I mean, quite literally, there is now another search. Word about the time frame for the search process for the minister of congregational life. Things tend to happen at pretty set times during these national searches, during these open searches. And that time includes one of the big dates being the day that search committees and congregations first receive the names of those ministers who have expressed interest in that congregation, in that church. That day happens every year on the first business day after New Year's Day. In other words, tomorrow. Tomorrow, your search committee is going to receive the names, however many there are, of all of the ministers who have expressed interest in the Unitarian Church of Baton Rouge as a possible place to serve. And search committees and other congregations nationwide will also be receiving names tomorrow. And sure, some of them will be getting some of the same names that we are, because ministers often express interest in more than one church. But that's when the process really kicks into high gear, tomorrow. So I say this first as a gentle reminder and offer of consolation to the members of our search committee, including my colleague, Reverend Nathan Ryan, who is going to be, of course, part of that search, that you've got a lot of reading ahead of you this week as you start receiving the somewhat extensive ministerial records of every minister. It's not just names you're going to be getting pages and pages of information they've identified about themselves as being relevant. So starting the process of discernment, it begins tomorrow. And from there, things go into a little different gear. I've been trying to consult as closely as I can with the search committee throughout this process. That's one of the roles we interim ministers have. And also, I have been sharing with so many over my career as an interim minister, what it means to deal with various aspects of the search process. Now, that's not coming to an end, but I am, as of this weekend, going to back off. Because one thing we interims have learned over the years is that two things are important. One, it's very important for us not to influence the selection of our successor. We're here to facilitate the healthiest possible process for doing so, but it's not our call about the specific ministers and how they're evaluated. But not only is it important not to do that, it's important not to appear to be doing that as well. And I take both of those seriously. So while I'll still certainly be available to offer insights into process if a specific question comes up, I'll also be deferring if I do happen to receive a question, which I think our search committee is wise enough to avoid asking, that's more specific than it should be. It's an exciting time. It'll be a busy time for the search committee members. And so if you know someone who's on the search committee, offering a bit of commiseration and some grace for the fact that they are about to be pretty busy and maybe a little bit less available than sometimes. But we're looking forward to what I expect to be a very healthy process and a robust one. And the date for them to make their final selection will be at the end of March. And then there's a couple of last T's to cross and I's to dot. But hopefully sometime in early to mid-April, we can announce who your next minister of congregational life will be. I'll stay with you through the beginning of summer. In fact, it's looking like my final Sunday with you, coincidentally, will be Father's Day, and coincidentally, Juneteenth. With those updates, and knowing that your new minister of congregational life will likely begin on August 1st, that gives some understanding of what's coming, and I hope for those who have felt like the change has lasted too long. However, that does or doesn't fit the facts is beside the point. It's felt like that for so many, and that feeling is valid. There is a light at the end of the tunnel, and it's not a train. It's good news that is coming for this church. I'm excited for it. And we'll conclude in a few moments with some last thoughts about what living through the last part of this transition time means. But I want to first say one thing about what we're about to hear. For the next few Sundays leading up to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day, we're going to be sharing as our anthem a piece of music that was important to Dr. King and so many others who fought beside him for civil rights. Lift every voice and sing. It began life as a poem right at the beginning of the 20th century by James Weldon Johnson. His brother, John Rosamond Johnson, then wrote music to go along with the words. Both of the brothers were important artists during the Harlem Renaissance period that emerged shortly thereafter in the early 20th century. But that poem was written originally to celebrate the 91st anniversary of the birth of Abraham Lincoln. But it's gone on to take so much more meaning here in the United States. It's often referred to as the Black National Anthem. I've had the honor of singing it at NAACP meetings and events, an organization for which it's become a particularly important song. And its stirring promise of freedom and its religious imagery were used frequently throughout the civil rights movements of the 1950s and 60s. So let's hear it now.
Joy
Well, we do share with one another in so many ways. There is still in our virtual worship an opportunity for tangible sharing as we receive the morning's offering, which you may share virtually, and I believe information will be shared about how you can do so. But please remember that this is not only for the continued good works of this congregation and its financial support, we also share our offering every Sunday with an organization in the community doing good works in concert with in harmony with our Unitarian Universalist values. This January, this month of the birth of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., we are honoring work that was meaningful for him as we share our offering with Dialogue on Race, Louisiana. We invite you to support both, to give generously as our offering is now gratefully received. Our anthem for this and the next couple of Sundays, Lift Every Voice and Sing, has taken on for me in the last almost 13 years now a new and very specific significance. Ever since the inauguration day for the first African-American president of the United States. Now, I'm not speaking to Barack Obama's political party or his policies, positively or negative, but I speak to the weight of history of the day that the first African-American person was inaugurated as president of this nation, and how the impact and the power of that history was brought home so powerfully as the benediction at that inauguration service was given by the Reverend Joseph Lowery, himself a close associate of Dr. King, former president of the organization King had founded, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. And it is hard for me to describe the lift of my spirit as Dr. Lowery stepped to the pulpit, the podium, and the first words of his prayer were words we just heard sang a few moments ago. God of our weary years, God of our silent tears. The weight of so much experience of African American people in our country brought forward in the most powerful way and prayerful way I could possibly have imagined, that spoke to the conclusion of a profound transition. Well, one aspect of a profound transition. We know, of course, how much did not change in our country because an African American person was elected president. And again, I'm not speaking to President Obama's policies or party. I'm speaking to the racial challenges and injustices our nation has continued to face. But the time when it looked like a person of color could not ascend to the highest office of the land had come to an end just a few moments before, And those words marking the conclusion of that transition, marking the beginning of that something new, that's new presidency. Put it in a historical context more deeply and profoundly than almost anything else I could have imagined. It's a reminder to me that when we allow ourselves to accept the transitions that are happening around, to accept the fact that things are changing around us, and to lean into that neutral zone of transition, doing the work that helps us to prepare for whatever new is to come, even though the time we're in is disorienting, confusing, frustrating. Leaning into that time gives a hope for something better to come. I mentioned the television show The West Wing earlier. I'll close with a quote from one episode of that. This was not the president in that show, but a guest star. The actor playing him was Matthew Modine, speaking with one of the regular characters. Actress Allison Janney played the press secretary to the president, C.J. Craig. And his words were, speaking of the best times and how many people look to the best times being behind them, saying, no, I think the best days got to be the next day. Life is all, what's next? It's like those billboards where before the actual ad goes up, they put in big block letters, watch this space. Well, I invite you all to keep watching this space that is emerging in new ways here at the Unitarian Church of Baton Rouge, and to watch the new space that is emerging in this year. And even though we are weary, and there have been certainly tears, there is so much good that can come for us in this time that is coming. So may it be for us all. Happy New Year. Amen.
We are building a new way. We are building a new way. We are building a new way, feeling stronger every day. We are building a new way. We are working to be free. We are working to be free. We are working to be free. Hate and greed and jealousy. We are working to be free. We can feed our every need. We can feed our every need. We can feed our every need. Start with love, that is the seed. We can feed our every need. Peace and freedom is our cry. Peace and freedom is our cry. Peace and freedom is our cry. Without these, this world will die. Peace and freedom is our cry.
And so, as we go forth from this sacred time, from the many sacred places where we have gathered, into this sacred new year that is beginning, may we go forth knowing ourselves to be graced with blessings of freedom, blessings of wholeness. For though our worship now ends, so begins our service. let us go forth to serve this hurting world in the spirit of love. Thank you for joining us. Go in peace.